Starting off, ki te kahore he whakatikinga ka ngaro te iwi. Without foresight or vision, the people will be lost. This whakatauki refers to leaders amongst us who help to guide us with respectful, positive, and affirming insights that allow us to learn and to safely question what we think we know. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you all to Janelle Riki-Waaka for our first webinar keynote session of this symposium. Ngā mihi nui kia koe, Janelle. I know of Janelle more through reputation, watching you learn, and through many mutual colleagues and acquaintances. And due to all these factors, I feel like I've actually known her for much longer. She's a very sought after facilitator and speaker. She's highly experienced in many avenues of education, including developing cultural competencies, te tiriti o waitangi education and digital technologies. Her career has really been dedicated to improving the educational journey for all tamariki, but with a particular focus on empowering Māori, which led naturally to Gifted Next asking her to speak at our keynote. Janelle is familiar with areas of giftedness from a Māori perspective, but also brings lived experiences, both personally and professionally, that are really important for us to hear and to ponder upon. So, nō reira, nō mai, haere mai Janelle, kia koe ihoa. Welcome. They're all yours.
Morena. Can I just double check that you can all hear me okay? Otherwise, it's going to be a very long hour, e te whānau, if you can't hear me. Kia ora, morena. Tēnā koutou katoa ki a koe, Deb, nau I whakatuwhera a tātātou hui I tēnei ata. O te rā kia kōrua Justine, kōrua ko David, tēnā kōrua. O te rā kia koutou, e noho ana I ngā kāinga I Aotearoa, I rongo ana, e mātakitaki ana I tēnei kauhaurangi I tēnei ata. Tēnā koutou katoa. It is so lovely to be here with you this morning. It's actually particularly early for me because I am on holiday in Brisbane. So it's 7:07 AM for me here. But it is such a pleasure to be up and about nice and early and to share this morning with you all. I'm going to jump into screen share mode and get started. But I just want to thank you all. A big mihi from me that you are up, probably early for school holidays, let's be honest, and you are online and engaging and learning. So a massive mihi from me to all of you listening in, but also to the Gifted Next team who have invited us and created a space for us all to come together this morning. So let me jump into screen share mode. And then you do that, you know, any of you who have done presentations will know, then you do that dance around with buttons that are all over your screen and you try and figure out, Debs, I can see you in my window. Can you just give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen? Okay, ka pai. We're winning so far, e te whānau. Let me click on this one. Ko waio, he uri tēnei no tainui waka no whaingaroa ahau, engari e Pākiki ana au ki o tau tahi, I raro I te maru o te haukainga I reira, ngai tuahuriri, ngai tau whānui. He mihi ka tika ki a rātou, ngā rātou I tiaki I a au, mātou ko oku whānau ki tēnā whenua. Ana toku maunga, ko te maunga o Karioi, kei whaingaroa tēnā, anei hoki oku whānau, ko Janelle Riki-Waaka tōku ingoa. Kia ora, morena I te whānau. This is kind of me on a page, if you like. I hail whakapapa wais to the beautiful Waikato Tainui. My father is from Raglan, and in the top left corner is a picture of my beautiful maunga, Karioi maunga. And I have predominantly kind of grown up and lived in Ōtautahi in the South Island in Christchurch, and have been very fortunate and blessed to have been cared for by the mana whenua in Ōtautahi, Ngai Tuahuriri and Ngai Tahu Whānui, the many runaka of Ngai Tahu. That's a photo of my beautiful husband in this picture as well. He his whakapapa links are back to Te Aupori, Te Kao in the far north, and he is a waka, which is kind of the equivalent to Smith in Te Ao Pākehā. Everybody seems to know Waka. So he is from the Waka whānau in Otaki. And I did see in the comments that we've got some whānau from Otaki, so they may know some of his relations in that space as well. Oldest of 5 children, 3 of us in education, mama bear of 5 beautiful tamariki as well, one of whom is here in Brisbane, who we're visiting with at the moment. Various amazing talents in our beautiful tamariki, and quite diverse. They're all kind of into different things, which is quite normal, isn't it, for our whānau and our kids to be finding their own pathways of love and passion to follow. Massive fan of 90s hip hop, and often when I'm presenting, if it's a long day, I tend to just sporadically break into a running man. So if you see me doing some cool 90s hip hop moves, feel free to join me at Te Whānau. It's a great way to stay energized, keep our energy levels up. And that's just a little bit about me. And normally when I get to spend an extended period of time with you, I would love to hear all about your whānau and connect with you. Obviously, when we're in webinar type settings, it's a little bit difficult, but I do invite you to pop into the chat if you haven't already, just a wee mihi, who you are, where you're from, so that at least those of you watching the chat as we start our session will be able to perhaps make some connections with others who are watching in also. So please use the chat to engage in our new method of whanaungatanga. Now that so much of our work is online, it is a nice way still to connect with people. E mihi ana e te whānau. I'm a massive, massive fan of Maya Angelou, and if you haven't stumbled across Maya Angelou, I encourage you to go hunting for some of her beautiful mahi. She was a poet and an activist, amongst visionary leader, amongst a whole bunch of other things. But Maya, one of my favourite whakatauki, if you like, from Maya is do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. Why do I love this so much? There's a couple of reasons. The first is I believe it's a call to action. It's a call to action to open our minds and our hearts to deeply understanding that we just don't know everything. And there is still so much more to learn. And if you're anything like me, I get to learn things, new things every day. And sometimes those things grind up against something I already knew. Sometimes they directly challenge it. Sometimes they're the complete opposite of things I thought I knew innately and really well. So I try really hard to keep an open mind, enough open so that I allow myself to be challenged by new perspectives. I allow myself to be wrong. I allow myself to know better. I let that in and I consider it. I sometimes fact check it. I sometimes chat to people about it, but I allow that new knowledge to come in. The other part of this whakatauki that I love is that when you have the koha of knowing better, because it is a gift in a sense when you get an opportunity to learn something that you didn't know before. When you have the koha to know better, it comes with the responsibility to do better. Knowing better and not doing better is the very definition of ignorance. That is actually what ignorance is. It's knowing better and choosing to do the opposite or choosing to do differently. When you know better, that beautiful koha comes with a responsibility. So today I may share some things with you that may grind up against some things that you already know. I'm inviting you to open your mind, let the knowledge come in, let it percolate in your brain, have chats about it, research it, check it, and form your own opinions. But please, if there are some things you learn today, please know that they come with a responsibility to do some more and to do better in some of these spaces. I often joke that I get out of bed in the morning to deliberately make people uncomfortable. And it's kind of one of those, sorry, not sorry moments, because one of the things that I know is some of our best learning comes out of moments of discomfort. And so I'm aiming for, I want to be really honest about this, I'm aiming for kind of wedgie level discomfort here, Estefano, not punch you in the face discomfort, okay? So if I happen to give you a wedgie moment, my job is done. I will be a happy lady, because in that discomfort will come something that will stay in your heart and your mind after you leave this session. It'll be something that you give further consideration to, and that's what I'm all about. I'll be wrapped if that happens. So let the wedgies begin, shall we? I wanted to share this quote with you. It is one of my favourites. It's from Edward Shortland, written in 1856 after he spent quite a significant amount of time observing Māori in their natural habitat, his words, not mine. And Rawiri Taunui has put together some of this research of this time, and it is his experience of how young Māori children were raised by their parents. And this is one comment that particularly stayed with me. Curbing the will of the child by harsh means was thought to tame his spirit and to check the free development of his natural bravery. The chief aim, therefore, in the education of Māori children being to make them bold, brave, and independent in thought and act. No matter how many times I hear this quote, it continues to just hit me right here, because it is a window into the education of our Māori kids prior to colonisation, and what our ancestors believed about educating Māori tamariki at that time, that the chief aim was to make them bold, brave, and independent in thought and act. And anyone who's had the joy of teaching some of our rambunctious Māori children, as I have for many, many years, will know many of them are very, very independent in thought and act. And this doesn't always align well with how school goes and the rules of school and the boundaries. So we need to give some consideration to the fact that this is actually a trait that would have been nurtured and developed in the time of our ancestors. I often say to my son, you were just born at the wrong time. If you'd have been born in another time, you'd have been revered for your skills in being independent in thought and act, my darling. This same, can I just take a wee second here? Can you just see this gorgeous wee man? This is my nephew. This is HJ, Riki-Waaka Jack, who is very independent in thought and act, as you can see. Bless his heart. And this whakatauki reminds me of him. Ko te mahi a te Tamaiti he wawahi taha. The job of a child is to break calabashes. And this is, in essence, many of our young tamariki in the time of our ancestors, their job was to go and fill the calabash, the taha, walk down to the awa and fill it with water and carry it back. And of course, their parents, their grandparents, their aunties and uncles would know that in the process of doing this, there would be many, many of those gourds or those calabashes that would be broken in the process, because they would muck around and have a little laugh and maybe a bit of a push and shove and all those kinds of things that kids do, and they would break them. And they were often told by their nannies, ko te mahi a te Tamaiti he wawahi taha. It's their job. Their job is to push the boundaries, to test things out. They're going to break things in the process of creative exploration. So how do we create a space for breakage? And that really grinds up against my OCD, well, it's not serious OCD, but my fussiness. Because how do we create a space? And as you can see, Hiriwaka's parents have become well accustomed with giving him the space to break calabashes, and look at the creative juices going for this beautiful Tamaiti as he does that. So how are we going to create a space for those tamariki who want to self-explore and break some rules in the process of self-exploring? it's really important that we acknowledge the whakapapa of our education system. And I'm not going to spend too long on this, and we will make sure you get the slides so you can read a little bit more into this, and you're welcome to do your own research. But if we look at 1867, which is only just very quickly after the signing of Te Tiriti, the Native Schools Act was written, and the primary purpose, we wrote this into legislation in our country, the primary purpose of education for Māori at that time was to assimilate Māori into Pākehā culture. Access to secondary school education was pretty limited for our Māori kids, and at that, you know, as late as the 1930s, there was less than 1,000 Māori in secondary education. That's generally because many Māori were still living rurally, and secondary schools were in urban centres. So that's a good part of that reason, but not the only part. When native schools first came to be established, hapu were required to donate the land for those schools and contribute to the costs of building the schools, as well as the teacher salaries. Te Reo Māori was banned from schools, and any speaker of Te Reo Māori would be subjected to corporal punishment. We need to know and understand this. If you're involved in education, please be very clear where our education system started. We've come a very long way, and that's a celebration, but it is important to understand the whakapapa of education and how it came to be here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Because the truth is, our system at that time wasn't designed for tamariki Māori to be successful. That was not the primary aim of education. The primary aim of education for Māori was to assimilate them into dominant culture, and that required their language, culture and identity to be stripped from them. And as an educationalist and someone who has been passionate and dedicated to education my entire life, the biggest sadness in that is that I feel like they weaponized education. They weaponized school as a tool for colonization. And that makes me really sad, because it is certainly a system and a place that I have come to love very deeply, and who, you know, a space I've given much time and energy to. So, but we need to understand its beginnings and its origins. This particular photo, I feel, is sums it up just by looking at it, really. Essentially, doesn't that teacher look warm and nurturing in this photo? Essentially, you can see this is an infant class, so probably first year of school, possibly second year of school, but certainly the children are not aged 5, so that there are varying ages in the room. There's not just Māori children in the room, so non-Māori could go to native schools as well if it was convenient for them. What I find really interesting is these children are holding up slate boards. They all have nearly identical pictures. And from what I can tell, there's a fish and a snail and potentially a bunch of grapes. It's hard to tell. And so because they are so identical, there's a very high chance that they've either copied it or they've been given very direct, explicit instructions to make them all look exactly the same. What I find ironic about this picture is that there's a very good chance that some, if not many, of these children have intimate knowledge of what a fish looks like, have caught them, touched them, eaten them, possibly even caught thousands of them. But they needed to come to school to be told to draw a fish like this, because this is what a fish looks like. You may also notice the map in the background as well, which is predominantly of Europe and not of other spaces, which is interesting. So you can see that our education system, the early start of education for Māori tamariki particularly, was to colonize them, to assimilate them into dominant culture. Again, important for us to know and understand. Intergenerational trauma is something I'm been looking into the last couple of years, and I'm doing more and more research around this. What causes it? What are the outcomes of it? What does it look like? I need to be able to see it. I want to be able to see it as it lives. And intergenerational trauma will occur in any group of people, when they have a loss of language, a loss of their home, when their access to resources that they require are restricted, when their cultural practices are banned or prohibited, when the cycle of intergenerational transfer of knowledge from one generation to another is broken, when we dismantle practices such as child rearing, education, when those practices that have become innately embedded in the psyche of a culture are dismantled, all of those things, one of those things can cause and will cause intergenerational trauma. In essence, when you discredit, you belittle, you disparage the language, culture, and identity of an entire race, and you do that on repeat over many years, you are going to cause very deep, very obvious, and very long-lasting intergenerational trauma. And that's very important for us to know and understand, particularly how intergenerational trauma presents itself today. How do we see that? What are the outcomes of deeply embedded and intergenerational trauma? This is what that looks like. And many of you, if you have been in any way, shape, or form involved in education, will know and will have seen this firsthand. That as a Māori woman, as a Māori mother, it is heartbreaking to me, and I lose sleep at night thinking about the fact that Māori have the highest rates in youth suicide, poor achievement, low wages, violence, our life expectancy is shorter, higher rates of depression amongst our people, poverty, highest rates of incarceration. It goes on. It goes on and on. We are top of the stats in all the wrong stats and all the stats we wish we weren't top of. Doesn't mean to say we don't have amazing positives, but this is something we need to deeply see and acknowledge. And if anyone has taught in the junior school or even in early education, you will know intergenerational trauma exists even in small children. I've met angry 3-year-olds who are mistrusting of education, of systems, of people, and some of that is remnants of intergenerational trauma. It's not always exclusively, but we do see this present itself in many of our children. As late as 1931, the Director of Education in New Zealand said that Māori schools should train Māori boys to be farmers and Māori girls, Māori boys to be farmers and Māori girls to be farmers' wives. So that was the expectation. That was what the education system believed we should be as Māori, trained to be. That's what the purpose of schooling was for many of us. And so I can tell you that my father's generation, and some of you in the room may have the same whakaaro, the same thing in your whānau. My father's generation, most Māori in that generation were trained to be farm workers and labourers and cooks and cleaners and wait staff, linesmen. My husband and I had a good conversation about how many linesmen were in his whānau. Shearers, factory workers, machinists, barmen, forestry workers, freezing workers, housekeepers. A bunch were went into armed forces of various denominations. And I look at that list and I think, okay, my dad was a freezing worker. He was also a forestry worker. He was also bar staff. So he actually moved in and around within this space through quite a few different careers. But because the thought was that Māori should train to be farmers and farmers' wives, we need to know and understand that that's exactly what happened. We did actually go past farmers and farmers' wives, but we certainly, our education was mapped and planned and precisely developed around Māori going into careers such as this. When I went to school, the narrative that was told to me and that I believed and that the general population around me seemed to believe, is that Māori were great athletes, we were amazing entertainers, we were funny, hilarious, told good jokes, fantastic cooks, talented artists, told good stories, sang good waiata. And so many of my generation were trained and went into careers working predominantly in service, predominantly for Pākehā, manual labour, entertainment type jobs. Now, that's not all of us. I'm making some generalisation, but when I look at my cohort of friends that were Māori, a good percentage of them went into spaces that were expected of us, where our education was developed towards. This is me at high school. And you can see just a quick scan of my report card, how high school went for me. It's pretty telling, actually. I think this comment's quite hilarious. Can be moody at times. I'm 6, for goodness sake. 6-year-olds are moody some days. So it was an interesting comment to write on my report card. But there's one in particular in there that stands out to me, that I still hadn't realised that passing school cert was my responsibility alone. Quite telling of the pedagogical practice in play at the time when I went to school. You show up to class, you're responsible for the learning, you're responsible for the passing. And if you choose not to listen in class, then I'm going to teach the kids in front of me, which is predominantly how most of my education went. The kids that wanted to learn, they sat up the front, they got all of the instruction from the teachers. If you didn't want to learn, so long as you were being quiet, you were kind of left alone. You could sit at the back of the class and just kind of, I don't know, cruise through high school with not too many people shoulder tapping you saying, hey, how you going? Can I check on you? Can we do some more work? You've got more potential. You can, all of those things. So one teacher went as far as to say I was a constant disappointment in my report card. Another just wrote Janelle who. I was so insignificant in my 12 months in science class of 5th form that my teacher just wrote Janelle who on my report and sent it home for my parents. Thank goodness we don't write report cards like this, right, anymore. Gosh, you read those and it's appalling. And you think, gosh, I can't believe that people wrote that in report cards. And as a teacher and an educator myself, I certainly expected more of the education system when my son went to school. And there's a wee scan of his report cards. This wasn't so long ago, if you look at the dates down there. You know, they read fairly, some of you may be reading these going, gosh, it's like reading my son or daughter's report card. Lacks work ethic and commitment, potential but. My son actually believed that potential was a hyphenated word with but, because he never heard potential but self. It always came with but, potential but. So he thought they must be hyphenated because they just go together. Pretty standard comments for anyone who's had a child where education was, you know, as around, you know, a square hole and you're a round peg. It just didn't work for you. So many of you may be familiar with comments like this. Communicates his thoughts when they have not been asked, or I think those of you as teachers all know what that means. And when you write a comment like that, wasting my time. My child's wasting his teacher's time by coming to school. Poor effort, lazy, lacks work ethic, all of those kinds of things. Now, I can assure you, E Te Whānau, that both Jordan and myself have grown up and we've done okay in life. So please don't panic if you were. You know, in terms of academic achievement, I have a master's degree with first class honours. It's probably the highest attainment, if you like, in terms of academia. But I've been okay. I've managed to do okay in my career. My son equally has done amazing in another realm. He's a professional athlete, plays a professional sport at an elite level, represents his country even in that sport. So he's done fine. And neither Jordan or I could have gotten to where we've gotten to if we didn't have things like work ethic and commitment and passion, if we didn't know how to apply ourselves. You know, all of those things that school said we weren't were the very things that propelled us to success in adult life, which leaves the question, did I just not show those qualities at school, or were they just not looking in the right places? That's the question I have. Were they not looking for it, or did I not show them? Did I hide all the best parts of me at school, or were they not nurtured? Were they not invited into the space so that they could be seen? It's a question for you to ponder yourselves. I'll read this quote to you because I think it's quite a powerful one. We were dealing, it would seem, not so much with culturally deprived children as with culturally deprived schools. And the task to be accomplished is not to revise and amend and repair deficient children, but to alter and transform the atmosphere and operations of the schools to which we commit these children. Quite like this quote, it's quite powerful. What interests me outside of how powerful I think this quote is when it was written in 1976. Why does that interest me? Because I guess it is the realization that we have been talking about this for a really long time. This is not a new conversation that we need to grow cultural competencies. We've been talking about this for a long time. This is not a sudden realization. It's not a fad. It's not a new thing. It is an old thing, because you can see the whakapapa of our education system yourself. You can see what the thoughts were. You can see what the process was. And you can see, as I said, that education was used as a weapon in many ways to assimilate Indigenous children worldwide, globally, and cause deep trauma, not on its own, but that coupled with a bunch of things caused deep, deep trauma amongst many Indigenous people. So how do we culturally empower our schools? What are culturally empowered spaces? How do we turn this around so that Māori children are able to see themselves as much more than what we have previously pigeonholed them to? The question I guess I have asked myself for many years is, do we only see what we go looking for? Is what we're trying to focus on, is that all we're going to get? And for some of our children, is that all they'll show us? Is that all we invite into the lens? And I always think about camera lenses when I think about this. It's like you look through a camera lens and you see what you see through the lens, but all of this other stuff could be going on behind you and to your peripherals and all around you, but your eyes are down through the lens. It's the same as looking on a phone at a concert, or those kinds of things. What you're focusing on is all you're going to see. Oh, look at these two. This is my son and I. You can see the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, but look past the pictures, e te whānau. I put them in there for effect because often what we see and what we're trying to see are behaviors like bossiness and defiance and children being demanding and loud and outspoken and argumentative and all of those things that are behaviors that we see in our tamariki. And funnily enough, they were seen in my son. And these are the very behaviors that I was trying to grow and nurture at home. So I was working dead against the school. They're trying to do one thing, stamp out those behaviors out of my son. And as a mum, I'm trying to grow them because I didn't see bossy. I saw leader. I didn't see defiant. I saw absolute determination. I didn't see loud. I saw confident to speak one's own mind. So I was at home growing all this stuff. He was going, yeah, cool, I'm into it, Mum, and I'd take it to school, and they'd be like, that is terrible. The very things I believed would be the attributes that would support my son to a successful life, whatever that was, were the very things that school were trying to stamp out of him. And so I had to have one of the hardest conversations I've ever had to have it as a mum and say, to my son really openly and honestly, school's not for you, bub. Square peg, round hole. I'm sorry. I wish it was. I'm trying to change the system. I'm not going to get it in time for you. I wish that I could. I'm working as hard as I can, but it's not going to happen in time for you. You've got a couple years left. Learn the rules, play the game, get through. That's the conversation I had to have. And it broke my heart because I don't believe in that. I believe education is a place that should foster our kids to be who and what they are, not a place where they should learn the rules and play the game. That is not fostering who they are. That is not fostering creativity. And it is not certainly going to bring out the best in them and allow them to lean into the gifts that they have. So what if the behaviors that I'm trying to grow at home as a Māori whānau, because we value those behaviors and those values and those ways of being, are the very behaviors they're trying to stamp out at school? We're not on the same page. How do we get on the same page so that our tamariki feels supported? We've got to look past the finger and dig deep into what is it about you? What are those qualities in you that we could support to be nurtured? And sometimes it's about teaching our kids to use their powers for good, right? Their superpowers for good. How do we do that? There are Māori gifts, and I want to be really clear about this. I believe all children have gifts. That doesn't necessarily mean I believe all children are gifted, but I do believe all children have gifts. And from a Māori perspective, those gifts are often handed down from our ancestors. Ngā taonga tuku iho, passed on from our ancestors, innate in our blood. And Māori forms of giftedness, I would not say I'm an expert, but I am a learner. I'm certainly a learner. And there are amazing people who have done phenomenal work. Jill Bevan-Brown is, in my opinion, a pioneer in this space in terms of Māori forms of giftedness. And then you've got a bunch of others that work in this space. There's tons. Melinda Webber's another amazing person in this space as well. I'm a learner in this space. And I have been working in and around Māori forms of giftedness for many years, but I continue to learn and grow every day. But the list of Māori forms of giftedness, and there are others, but this I think sums up many aspects of Māori forms of giftedness, are quite different. And they probably are something that possibly many of you haven't even come across. I encourage you to look into it. We're not going to talk too much about it today, but I can certainly point you in the right direction if you want to learn some more. They are predominantly grounded in kaupapa Māori and viewed as being owned by the entire group. I love this, for the benefit of all. If you are gifted, that in a Māori sense, in a Māori form of giftedness, that gift is owned by everybody. So it's like, we've got someone on our team who, we've also got someone else in our whānau who, you know, those gifts are for the betterment of all, and they are collectively owned in a sense. When someone has that gift, it is something that's going to benefit everyone. And I love that. As I said, there's lots of research into this and lots of amazing resources. So I encourage you to dig a bit deeper. The other thing I wanted to mention about Māori forms of giftedness is that predominantly they would be, and I love this quote by Deutsch, seen in his or her capacity to lead people in the things that they value most. Aroha, Manaaki, Whai Kōrero, and Mana, to name but a few. But so Māori children who have Māori forms of giftedness will then want to lead others in that space. And that's important because it plays into tuakana taina and certainly our desire to want to share those gifts with others and help others develop them as well. But there's a whole bunch of tamariki Māori who will go through an entire education system, early childhood, primary, intermediate, secondary, all the way, even tertiary, and never, ever know about those significant gifts within them. They don't get discovered. And I would say I was one of the children that went all the way through education, all the way to 7th form, and had a whole bunch of potential that nobody discovered, including myself. And that's why my report card and who I am as a person don't marry up. It's the same with my son. The potential, the skills, the expertise, the gifts that I had were not discovered at school, and neither were my sons. And this will be true for many, many more. What can we do about this? Where do we start? The very first thing we need to do is have a conversation with whānau, hapu, akonga about what they value and what their aspirations are. The two best questions to engage with Māori in terms of asking them are, what are your aspirations for your tamariki? Just start there. Just start at that conversation. What are your aspirations? What's important to you? What do you value as a whānau? Because we need to uncover whether they are trying to build something and nurture something at home that is the direct opposite of what's happening at school. If we're not on the same page, these poor tamariki are becoming very confused, and they're changing who they are depending on context. We don't want that. We want to see the best of them in every context. We need to decolonize our system. I've talked to you about the whakapapa of our education system. We are a long way from there. And I'm very proud of our education system now. But in my opinion, there is remnants of that whakapapa still within the system. We have to seek it out. We actually have to go looking for the bias. We almost have to be bias hunters. Go and find the bias, and don't let it rest until we've figured out how to remove those barriers. Because while the bias exists in the system, we are going to continue to see predominantly Māori and our Pacific peoples in the tail end of all the wrong stats, or at the top end of all the wrong stats. So we've got to seek out the bias. We've got to be able to enable our Māori akonga to reclaim their language, culture and identity at school. They weaponized education early on. Now we have to decolonize it. If it was the vehicle to assimilate Māori tamariki, then it can also be the vehicle to give them their language, culture and identity back. School needs to be part of the responsibility to grow Māoritanga in our Māori kids. That has to be, because it was education that took it away. Let it be the same place that gives it back. So we need to create spaces for our Māori kids to reclaim their language, culture and identity. You've just got to place a value on Te Ao Māori, an equitable value. I'm going to be honest with you, as a Māori woman, as a Māori student, as a Māori mother, I can tell you that in the education system, if the walls are white and the faces of the teachers are white and the curriculum is predominantly white, the books we're reading are about white people, and the content is predominantly white and the language is predominantly white, what that does is send a message: I must be wrong. I must be the odd one out, because everything else is norm. It's dominant, so it's normal, which makes me different. And so how do we change some of that narrative? Different doesn't have to be bad, but there's a connotation around different. There's a connotation around that. And many of you have worked in gifted spaces will know that connotation, and you would have felt it before. We've got to place a value on it. Te Reo Māori, important as English. Mātauranga Māori, important as a Western worldview. It's got to have value. If it doesn't have value, we are not going to undo some of that bias and that narrative that exists. We've got to stop relegating some behaviours to bad and start looking through the square window. And anyone who's my age will remember the old play school theme, where at the beginning of the day, where it goes, today we're looking through the round window, and it would zoom in through the round window. I often share an analogy. Imagine looking through the round window your whole life and seeing a table and a chair and a couch and a door, and not realizing that on the other side of the house that you can't see, on the direct opposite wall of the house, there's a square window, and through that window they can't see any of the things that I see, but it's the same room. They see a picture and a vase of flower. flowers and a cat sitting on a rug. And their whole life, they've been seeing that. And my whole life, we've been seeing this, but it's the same house. It's all about the window we look through. And step one of acknowledging that is take a step back and acknowledge your window. Oh my goodness, I've got a round window. I didn't know. And then acknowledge there's 4 more walls to the house and 4 more windows. And that other people are looking through different ones. Acknowledge that we have a worldview. That's step one. Step two is starting to realize that potentially there's some things in the room that we can't see. Just acknowledge that before we start worrying about what are those things we can't see. Let's just acknowledge there could be some things we don't know, that we don't see, that we don't feel, that others do see and do feel. And that's going to be step one on our next part of the journey, I think, as a country, as we head towards equity for everyone. I'm a massive fangirl of Melinda's. She's amazing. I don't know if you're in the room. If you are, I've said this out loud before, Melinda. You know I'm a fangirl of yours. But one of my favourite quotes from her, amongst many. Māori children need to know that they descend from greatness, and more importantly, they need to know that you know this also. I can hand on heart unequivocally tell you that in all the teachers I had in my entire education, I think possibly one sent me a message that they believed being Māori was a good thing. Outside of that, they were either indifferent about it, like I just wouldn't be able to tell you what they thought about being Māori, or they were quite clearly the opposite. They were quite clearly being Māori is not a good thing. And I had teachers make comments that back that up. What we need is universally as an education system to be sending a message loud and clear. Being Māori is so awesome. You're so lucky. I want children to go to school and lie in their enrolment forms about being Māori instead of not ticking the Māori box. I want it to be so cool to be Māori at every school in this country. That is the vibe we're heading for, because we've got to create a space where something you can't do anything about, your language, culture, and identity, is something that is held in high regard in the communities that we live, that our tamariki live in. So we need to send a message to our tamariki. Who they are is awesome. It is so awesome. We're jealous about it. It's so awesome. I want to share with you a couple of images I came across, and shout out to the Reo Mama Facebook group for these, around atua Māori and the innate, I guess, strengths of atua Māori and how we might emulate those in our tamariki Māori. I'm playing around with my earpods. I'm hoping that's not annoying you with sound. I love this. I talk to my tamariki all the time. You know, we talk about particularly many of our young Māori boys who are very Māori-like. But the thing is, we're not ever just one. We're all of them in different moments and different times. Those things that are innate in our atua Māori and our ancestors are the very things that stand us in good stead. They're the very gifts we were handed down. These deep tikanga, ways of doing, ways of being, are the things that we innately want to channel in our tamariki. I'm just aware of the time. I'm gonna we'll go through this next little part, and I may zoom a little bit and I may have to skip over a couple of slides. I'm just aware that we got started a little bit, just a few minutes late, so I might have to skip over a few things as we go through. We know that one size fits all teaching and learning doesn't work for everybody, and those of you that work in the giftedness space absolutely know this, intimately know this. What I would argue is one measure of success won't work for everybody either, and that's something we need to focus a little more on education, I think. A lot of people say to me, you know, what actually is Māori success as Māori? And I would say that you've got to be really clear about the difference, the success of Māori in comparison to the success as Māori. Success of Māori is predominantly measures, non-Māori measures, non-Māori assessment measures that produces non-Māori data and non-Māori subjects about Māori kids and how successful they were. And a provocative person who might say, actually, this is just data that will show you how well Māori kids are colonised to the system. How well did they learn the rules and play the game, essentially? It's not to say there's not a value on these measures. It's just to say, call it what it is. It is non-Māori measures producing data that shows the success of Māori kids. Success as Māori is tamariki having opportunities to grow in their Māoritanga. It's where education is a space where they are reclaiming their language, culture, and identity. That's success as Māori. It means the success that I achieve is predominantly to grow my Māoritanga. Doesn't mean to say it can be the only success. Success as Māori means our kids don't have to leave their language, culture, and identity at the door before they enter the classroom or before they enter the school. It's seen as an asset, it's seen as a gift, it is seen as what makes us special. That is success as Māori. And if you like, success as Samoan, success as whatever, success as female, whatever. It is where you don't have to leave who you are at the school. It's seen as the best part of you, the very best part of you. I've been witness to many well-intentioned, dedicated, passionate people in education sitting in rooms after school, long after a huge day's work, and chatting about how can we help Māori? How can we help our Māori kids do better at school, raise their achievement, increase their engagement, decrease their truancy, whatever. Well-intentioned people talking about how we can help Māori. And I've seen many of those conversations happen without a single Māori person in the room, not even one. You can't have that conversation without Māori in the room. That's the very definition, actually, of colonisation. Talking about what's best for Māori, not talking with Māori about potentially how we best might support them in their aspirations. So you've got to ask yourself this question: whose voice is missing from this conversation? Before we make a decision, before we plan the next step, before we lean into what we want to achieve, who is missing from this conversation? And how do we make sure we get them around the table? Rangatiratanga. Article 2 of Te Tiriti. I want to just share with you, ranga, to weave, tera, a group of people, and rangatira is a chief, a highly ranked person in the time of our ancestors, noble, esteemed. Rangatiratanga, to weave together people. It is an absolute symbol of leadership. It means Māori self-determination in Te Tiriti or Waitangi. But I want to be really clear about this. Rangatiratanga is to have self-determination, authority, agency, and the power to act. What does have mean? Have means we possess it, we experience it, we own it. We don't have to earn it. There's a difference. Māori don't need to earn the right to participate. We should have it. Te Tiriti grants us that. It grants us self-determination and authority and agency and the power to act. It is not something that our Māori kids and our Māori whānau need to earn. Earning something means you obtain it or you gain it in return for something. Rangatiratanga was granted to us. We should have it. In a space where we don't, how do we make sure that that happens? Let's skip over some of these now, just because of our time, but I'll make sure you get the slides. Our beautiful Dame Whina. she actually sums it up by saying we need to take care of our tamariki, what they hear, what they see, and what they feel, because they are going to run this country. How they grow will shape us as Aotearoa. They are going to make decisions that are going to impact our old age. It's in our best interest to make sure that they are going to make good decisions. We want them to be secure in who they are as they lead us through. I'm not going to share these with you, but I'll show you. I worked with my nieces and my children to look at how we might tell their success story in a different way. I won't read these to you now, but I'll make sure you get the slides. As I said, Hapa Anahira, we used attributes, skills, Aotearoa-tanga, how connected she is to herself, to her language, culture, and identity, and literacies to tell a story about Harper's success. Here's my Miss Taylor Grace. Oh, there's a lot of sass in there. I know lots of you have tamariki like this too. We want the sass to live on in these beautiful girls. This is our Taylor Grace with all the sass in the world. And I thought, well, what if we were measuring her success against bold, brave, independent in thought and independent in act as our ancestors did? Well, if we were measuring against those criteria, then Taylor Grace is top of the class in all of them. Yet, some of her success stories in terms of her reports may not indicate that. Again, is all we focus on all we see? Nico, our baby of our whānau, this is the first version. We worked on this together and we were starting to talk about, we need to measure some academic subjects, and we want to be able to measure that because they're vitally important. Being literate and numerate is hugely important. How do we measure these in a different way? And how do we write our story in a different way? Connected to one's own identity and culture is right up there in this success story. And we're telling that because that's important, because we placed a value on it. But interestingly, I just want to quickly share this with you. When I said to Nico, how would you write your own success story? What would be the things you would want to measure? These are his success measures. I love this. Making things in Minecraft, playing, drawing, tidying up, being a good friend, being kind, and doing things for others. That's what he believes are his, I guess, strongest assets, because he's measured himself pretty high, although there is a couple there that he's marked down a little bit. But these are things that he believes are valuable. This as a mama, this is what I want to read. I want to know what he believes is success. And he's telling me very clearly what he thinks is successful. Okay, I'm going to just finish up now to say, he mana tō te Tamaiti means every child has mana, and we must cherish it. Mana is not earned. Every single child is born with mana. Every single child has gifts. Again, clarifying, I'm not saying they're all gifted, but every child has gifts. I will finish by saying this. Sadly, a system that I love, the education system, its whakapapa, its beginnings weren't as great as I wish that they were. But certainly we've all got a hand in making sure that we change that narrative. It becomes not a vehicle to colonize, it becomes a vehicle to decolonize. It becomes a vehicle to empower, to enhance, to grow and nurture the mana of every single child, so that their gifts in the first instance can be seen. In terms of giftedness programs in the education sector, we've got to be really mindful. We watch out that doesn't become another way of colonizing by valuing certain areas of giftedness and not placing the same equal value on Indigenous forms of giftedness. We can't say this is more important than this. All of those areas of giftedness should be nurtured and developed and grown, because every child has mana and we must cherish that mana so that we can tell this story. Māori are creators and historians and scientists and astronomers and poets and physicians and lawyers and navigators and pioneers and architects and engineers and teachers and technicians and economists, authors, mathematicians, strategists, and innovators. That is the story. That is what I want our tamariki to know. That's what Māori are. They are anything you want them to be. They are anything you want them to be. You don't have to be a shearer or a freezing worker like my dad was told. You don't have to be a Māori singing chef like I was told. You can be anything. And we have to change the narrative for our kids. I'll finish with this. This is my kuia, one of my kuia, Eva Rickard. I love her. As you can see, I may have got a little bit of her sass. She says, me arahi, me whai, me whakawātea rānei. Lead, follow, or get out the way. And I love that. If it's not for you, get out of the waka. It's okay. Find the waka that is for you. If it is for you, lead others there. If you're not sure about leading, but you want to be in the kaupapa, then follow those that you aspire to be like or who encourage you. It's okay, but choose one of the three, because our tamariki deserve the very, very best that we can give them. E te whānau, nō reira tēnā koutou. I'm wishing you an amazing rest of the conference. I'm so grateful to be here today. I'm so sorry I've run a couple of minutes over, but we did have a late start. So I just want to mihi to you all. Nā reira, e ngā mana i ngā reo, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora, Janelle. Thank you. Let me just quickly change this to our gallery view and just say, oh my gosh, what an amazing message to remind us to challenge ourselves to look differently in so many ways. And I just want to hand over to Emma Scobie-Jennings, who just has a few words to share from us. Thank you, Emma.
Kia ora, Janelle. Ngā mihi nui ki e koe. You've set down quite the whittle there. I had goosebumps at some points. Yeah, just want to say a massive thank you on behalf of Gifted NEX for presenting to us today and getting up super early. That's extra commitment. I think you definitely gave us some wedgie moments there. And I think I can speak on behalf of everybody in saying that we'll definitely be taking your challenge and looking through the different windows and starting that conversation.